Welcome back, everybody. Matt and Rachel here still. And we are really excited to jump to our next panel that we've dubbed Redefining Natural, so part of our continued theme on rethinking the farm. We just finished a great session from Michael Mazourek, giving us a great intro and lead into this talk. So we will go around the horn here and introduce our panelists. So with us, hopefully the orientation is the same for all of you as it is for us, but top right, we have Michael Barron, who's the Director of Research and Development of AeroFarms. He has a MS degrees in data science and agronomy, and named to the 2017 Forbes 30 Under 30 list in science. He's a skilled scientist and researcher with 5 years of experimental design and big data statistical analysis experience. On our bottom right, we'll go clockwise, Michael Mazourek, who you all just heard from and know, a vegetable breeder that serves grower needs through improving disease and insect resistance, as well as flavor, which we heard a lot about, in agroecologically based production systems. He's an associate professor at Cornell University and a breeder and co-founder at Row 7 Seeds. And in our bottom left, our very own Daniella Reichstetter. Daniella is the executive director at the Center for Entrepreneurship here at Tuck and an adjunct assistant professor at Tuck. She has 15 years of experience running various divisions of early stage consumer companies, and most notably related to this panel as VP of Business Development and Finance at Belcampo Group. She's on the board of directors of the San Francisco Wholesale Produce Market as well. And Daniella has a BS from Georgetown and an MBA from Tuck. So welcome to all three of you. With that, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourselves, add anything that we didn't mention to your backgrounds and the companies you work for. And if you want to add on to that, how your company or institution is contributing to the future of food and agriculture and what problems they are addressing. That would be great. So I guess we'll start in the same order, or maybe we'll go reverse. We'll go counterclockwise. We'll start with Daniella.
All right. Well, first, thanks for hosting this. This is fabulous. Really delighted to be here with everybody today. Let's see, I can start with my current contribution to food, which is in my role at Tuck, supporting the Sustainable Food and Ag Club, which is part of what brought all this together. This is a club that's new to our business school, and I'm really excited that there's so much momentum behind it that we now have a virtual AgTech conference. Delightful. Let's see. So previously, I've been here for about 3 years. In this current role, was an entrepreneur for 15 leading up to this. And most notably for this panel is my work at Belcampo, where I was the head of business development and finance. Belcampo is a sustainable farm and restaurant group that's vertically integrated. So think 20,000 acres of land up in Northern California, raising somewhere around 13 species organically, sustainably, et cetera, doing all of the processing ourselves and then distributing through our butcher shops, restaurants, and third-party distribution. So very sort of vertically integrated. And if there's one way to define it, it's sort of hearkening back to an earlier time of how we raise animals for consumption and doing it a little bit more sustainably, sort of both for human health, animal health and welfare, and the environment. I've done a bunch of other work in food at startups, including Foodcraft Institute, a company called Frontier Bites, a company called Beaming Wellness, and I'm currently doing some work with a company we can talk about later called Renewal Mill.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you, Daniella. So Michael Mazourek, I know you just gave a lot of history to what you do in the previous panel, but for those that maybe are just joining us, if you want to give some additional background and how your company is contributing to the future of food.
Yeah, thanks. Again, Michael Mazourek, co-founder of Row 7 Seeds and a vegetable breeder. So I work on the crop before the crop, really. So it's we know all of us, enjoy the produce. That comes from farms. There's also a crop of the seeds that allow us to grow that food. And so big thing is looking at the choice within that. And we are working with a great group of chefs internationally, and also looking to take a lot of the plant breeders that are also working at innovations, new paradigms that have great things to share, and are helping to get them access to the marketplace and the partnerships that are going to let this multitude of solutions to our problems actually get out and get a chance to be utilized in the world, and to actually get a chance at solving some of these solutions.
Sure. Michael Behrens.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I'm the director of, sorry, Daniella. I'm the director of research and development at AeroFarms. I've been at AeroFarms for coming up on 5 years now. I started there as a plant scientist and held various roles, as plant scientist, data scientist, senior plant scientist, and now as director of R&D. I've spent my entire professional career in the agricultural space. After graduating from Harvard in 2011, I worked at Ingleby Farms and Forests, which is a sustainable agricultural company stationed outside of Copenhagen, Denmark. And then I spent some time in a joint agreement with between the University of Maryland and the Economics Research Service of the USDA in Washington, D.C., working in organic certification and quantification of all the organic land and acreage and livestock in the U.S. Then grad school, and then, well, first round of grad school, and then AeroFarms, and I've been there ever since. And the principle behind AeroFarms is that we grow indoors, vertically, and aeroponically. We can get into that a little more later. But I guess the kind of condensed version of what we're contributing is we use 95% less water. So 70% of the world's freshwater resources go to agricultural irrigation. We use 95% less water, so that's great. We produce more than 300 times what a field farm of the same size can produce, and we grow year round. So we sort of negate seasonality in the crops that we're producing. So yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on this panel.
We're excited to have all of you as well. Thanks so much for being. That was really helpful just to hear different perspectives. I think that all three of you are contributing some pretty unique perspectives and thoughts about agriculture. Going down to the basics, one of the things that Matt and I grappled with when we were thinking about this conference and this panel in particular is terminology. So it's a really basic stuff. What is the difference between innovation and technology? That's one thing that we talked about. Wanted to kick this off to you guys. Difficult question perhaps, but really in your mind, what is the difference between innovation and technology, particularly given the perspectives that you have? Anyone who has immediate thoughts is welcome.
Oh, Daniella, we have, I think we're going to bring you back, but if you need a minute, right. A second, and so we'll start with the Michael.
Okay,
yeah.
Sure.
So
go for it.
Oh, so I was going to say that it's the difference between technology and innovation is an important distinction, and we might not answer it all in one go. But one of the important things that we look at is in my area, there's a lot of just intensification. And when you hit a challenge with the intensification, the solution is to redouble your intensification efforts. So the key thing I think we're looking for is innovation is challenges to paradigms, not a new tool or a new technique to continue working on the same thing, but something that's really going to try to push you in a different way, in a different direction, something that really challenges. And a lot of the innovation, I think, won't necessarily look the most technological. There's a lot of room to incorporate a lot of the emerging technologies. but in a lot of our fields, as we've been focused on the sequence of a gene for a very long time and identifying what the genes are for a very long time. And that's really interesting and useful. And the tools have gone from taking millions and millions of dollars and years to sequence a genome to we can do it in a day. So looking at that, at some point, that's just getting better at the same thing. It's great tools, but it's not really changing how we use, interpret, how we approach a problem, or even what we consider a solution, one of the solutions we seek toward is. So it's really just that challenging paradigms and change in approach, I think.
Cool.
Yeah, I really agree with that entirely. Innovation being the challenge to the paradigm, technology being a tool that you can use. It's not necessarily, they're not mutually exclusive. Innovation can come in technology and with it, but I think that's spot on. I think that's a really good answer.
I don't know if Daniella,
I agree. Sorry about that. Allergy season. Yeah, I mean, if you think about sort of technology as kind of the application of scientific knowledge, right? So it's around known things, and innovation is a little bit more about kind of a new idea or new method of doing something that was sort of previously unknown, kind of a differentiator, right? Whether that's relative to ag or anything else.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge kind of as a species, kind of what's defined us as that we use tools. And so as you see, we love technology. That is what got us here, and literally is what got us here, today. So there's such a natural attraction and draw we have to it that it's sometimes blinding because it's naturally just so exciting to us, a new tool, that's what's good. Yeah, that's what's really empowered our species.
And the irony for me is sort of being on this panel, primarily representing some of the work that I did at Belcampo, where the reality is it's sort of revisiting what we did before and calling it innovative, right? But it's really sort of revisiting, sort of a hearkening back to an earlier era of doing things.
Well, I think that can challenge the current paradigm for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think there are. That's exactly the contrast that I think both Rachel and I have been thinking a lot about when we think about technology. And I think, Michael, this framing of changing the paradigm. It can come from different perspectives and different angles, and it can mean different things. It can actually physically mean a new piece of equipment, or it can be flipping the paradigm relative to something that happened in the past. It's really interesting. So to that end, and actually speaking of tools and things that often I think get us into the conversation of we're going to take this one step up in terms of philosophy and food is tackle the sustainability question. So tools, something that might often be considered at odds with sustainability or maybe contributing to it, depending on who you are and how you're using them. But we'd love to know from each of you how you define sustainability. And obviously it's such a hot topic in food. Everyone has kind of a different perspective on it. So from your particular organization and experience, what matters most and how do you define it?
Whew.
Daniella said we shouldn't ask her to define sustainability, but we're gonna there.
I can talk about it a little bit. I mean, I think the way that we think about it, certainly we thought about it at Belcampo, is you can't boil the ocean, right? You can't recreate the entirety of the food system. So what piece can you have an effect on? And how do you define sustainability therein? So I would make this akin to how do you define any other.
Uh-oh.
There's a cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger. We lost Daniella.
Yeah.
Well,
while we wait for this moment, maybe one of you can also chime in with your thoughts, and we can go back to Daniella.
Sure. I mean, sustainability, I guess, has a pretty standard definition, but it doesn't mean that it can't be iterated on, or other things can be incorporated into traditional agricultural production for more sustainable production. So what we do, going in a little deeper, is that we grow indoors. By being able to control the environment in the space. Oh, lost the host. By being able to control the environment in the space, we're able to. Just got a message from Matt saying you're on your own. We're able to produce a more predictable crop in a more like standardized fashion, I guess. So what we produce in the field takes 30 to 45 days, and we can produce it in about 2 weeks. So welcome back.
Keep going.
And we've also positioned ourselves right next to New York City. So our farm is based in Newark, New Jersey, 20 minutes outside of New York City. And what we mainly grow is leafy greens. And that is to supply the New York market, but also others on the Eastern Seaboard. And what that enables us to do is cut down on a lot of the carbon footprint that it takes to transport. Most of the leafy greens in the US are grown in Salinas, California, or Yuma, Arizona, depending on the season. Then they're packed into reefer trucks, shipped across the country. A lot of it is lost due to spoilage before it even makes it to the shelves. So we're able to get a fresher product to the consumer. We're able to do it faster. We're able to do it without the shipping costs, the refrigeration, the additional fuel that comes with that. Yeah, that's sort of the advantage and the I guess the sustainability proposition that comes from how we grow and what we do.
Great.
Yeah, I'd say for us, it comes on two levels. One is looking at kind of the system itself. So we're growing too, and we're looking at it in terms of looking at more of a closed loop, lowering inputs, which has some similarities to what Michael was saying. How can we create plants that are better at finding these nutrients? How can we create plants that are more efficient at using the nutrients that are there? How can we create systems where you can have nitrogen fixing plants mixed in with the plants that need the nitrogen from that? And so there's one aspect that's very system based, really looking at that aspect that we're focused on. And the other is in a broader thing, looking at the community. How do we there's a global level, of course, but how do we maybe create a system that allows participation and access to the tools that we're using and have got us here? How can others get access to be able to use them and build from them? So there's a social side, and of course the global environment side is important too. But for us, I think balancing the sustainability of the change and access with the system itself.
Great. Awesome. So Daniella, welcome back. Sorry, we had a cliffhanger on your the definition of sustainability. I think you were on the line of picking your lane and figuring out the area of impact that you can have. So I don't know if there was a line you wanted to finish there. But.
Yeah, I don't know where I cut off. I'm sorry, we're having some technical issues. But I was saying from Belcampo's perspective, thinking about the pieces that we can influence and being really specific about how you measure those and execute against them. And so, being better for both sort of humans and animal health quality of life of the animals, and then looking at the environmental impact. Water, energy, and waste were kind of the three main things. Did that go away now?
This happened already. You can keep going.
Yeah, they'll be back. It's okay.
Yeah.
He'll return.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm sorry I missed Michael, what you guys were saying with the tech issues, but that's kind of how we thought about it at Belcampo. But this sort of bigger question of what piece of the world can you kind of affect change in, right? And being thoughtful about putting yourself in that place from the company standpoint. The larger question of how you define sustainability in food, I think, is that could be a whole panel.
Absolutely. I think you noticed that we just dropped off. I guess this is where we are muted.
Can you guys hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Right.
I think
the irony of a virtual AgTech conference where we're just playing Russian roulette here on
the opportunities for growth and technology and also limitations. I think one thing that's really striking me about all three of you, there are a few commonalities. One is that you both have private sector experience and academic experience, but also the sustainability in each of the companies that you've worked with really being centered. One thing that we're thinking about is this balance, though, of access. So what does access mean? And to get away from this definitional line of questioning, we wanted to ask you a little bit about to what extent do you work with consumer preferences as a given versus trying to practically change the way that they consume? Michael, Barron, you mentioned that the role of somewhat of the role of access is relevant to being located near New York City, providing fresh vegetables and fruits to people in the city on a local basis. And then there's also this argument that, hey, maybe people shouldn't have lettuce in the wintertime in New York City. Maybe only people in California or Arizona should have that really. Wanted all three of you to touch upon that. And maybe in whatever lens you want, one way that we were thinking about it is really as a balance of the needs of food nutrition, food access, and food culture.
Yeah, that's a big question. I'll try to limit my emphasis on it, but I think it is a really important question. So food access, food culture, and there was a third one, Rachel, if you remind me of that.
And food nutrition.
And food nutrition. Okay, yeah. So touching on what you said about, only people in California should be able to eat lettuce during the winter times or something to that effect. It's an important point to make, and it's something that as a company, I guess, not necessarily intentionally, but by limiting the seasonality of the crop or negating the seasonality of the crops, it provides it year round. So I would argue that that's a pretty big innovation where most of the time sustainability, you'd have to sort of adhere to seasonality. And because our crops are grown year round and aren't affected by external climatic conditions, seasonality doesn't necessarily affect it. So the sustainability of the product is pretty much the same throughout, which I think is an important point to make. And hopefully we'll see a lot more innovation in this sort of niche of the space in the future, because I think that's like people, past practices being not necessarily the most sustainable, with crops being grown where they're produced the best, but then have shipped, and there's a lot of complications that come with that. And so emphasis on locality as well as limiting the seasonality impact of it, I think, is what we're trying to address. So that's one. Nutrition access, I think, is very important, and is going to become a more hot topic, hopefully politically, in the coming decades, because there's something that one of our C-suite executives cited when we grow in Newark, New Jersey, which is not a place that's known for its agricultural production. But they asked Newark high school students, a group of Newark high school students, where food comes from. And their answer was the grocery store. And they didn't necessarily understand that it was produced elsewhere, brought to the store, and then, you know, that's where they were able to purchase it, but that's not where it was produced. And so as agriculture in general comes more to the fore, I think access will become a hotter topic. And for us, by bringing these farms closer to city centers, we're hoping to increase access to everybody. And you know, leafy greens being nutritionally dense, that's sort of the angle that we're taking for that. I don't want to take up too much time, so you can come back to me about food culture. I have a lot of things to say, obviously.
That's great. Anyone else have particular thoughts on this?
Sure, I can hop in. So I think in looking at the Belcampo model, and you know, if anybody's done any sort of Googling of the company, you know, there's a lot of talk of it being sort of elite meat, right? And so from an accessibility standpoint, it's an aspirational business model, and it asks us to sort of make some choices with our pocketbooks on how we want to kind of direct our dollars with respect to sustainable food choices. But we're a long ways off from that, kind of scratching the surface on the accessibility side. I will say, so I'd like to talk a little bit about the experience that I had on the board. I just transitioned off of the San Francisco wholesale produce market, where we did focus a lot on food nutrition and food access. It's a wholesale market in partnership with the city of San Francisco, nonprofit company, where all of the basically tenants on the market are for-profit distributors and wholesalers of produce, with a very robust food recovery system, about 1 million pounds a year that go back to the food bank and the school system in San Francisco. And so really, and we worked a lot with small local farmers to get them into distribution in ways that they wouldn't otherwise be able. And I think that there's the learning in the market there for me is sort of the value of public-private partnership, various entities with different, you know, stakeholders with different points of view, and different needs that they're trying to serve, and roles that they can play and resources they can bring, kind of coming together to solve this collective question around nutrition, around food access, et cetera. I agree with Michael. The question of food culture could be a totally separate question, but you know, I think as we're looking at kind of innovative models for around nutrition and food access, asking sort of a variety of key stakeholders to come together and sort of contribute their part is one way I've seen be pretty effective.
Great.
Yeah, and I think, you know, coming back to food culture makes a lot of sense. I think for us, I think as we look at what we're trying to do in terms of kind of some of the access portion, I think to focus there is, you know, there's a lot of solutions, and a lot of us are looking to modify the environment in terms of many different facets of what that means, and to how, you know, many aspects of the environment and how that comes together, whether it's the physical and the growing space to the economic to where people pick up or how they perceive where the food's coming from. That's all kind of part of that. I think we, or maybe this is an I. So one of the things that we're approaching, and I think part of why what Chef Barber is focused on often in looking at the soil and the benefits of that, and what can be done with that. To me, and where I grew up, I grew up in a very rural part of New York. So I'm from the country. Looking at what needs to be done for the farmer. So in terms of the access, there's, on one side, you need to balance bringing prices down with the income of the people that are going to buy the food. And where do you get access and how to get distributed fair access? And so one thing that we're focused on in our connection to the soil is looking at how we can take what's going to be the fate of a lot of this land if it's not farmed. If it's not farmed well, it's probably also not good. But subdivisions, basements, bulldozers kind of take topsoil one direction. Looking at the opportunity to be able to have people make a living in the rural parts of the country or the world where they are working at an ecological system for production, where there's a little biosphere they create on their farm with what they're doing with the soil or the habitat. So I think there's an opportunity to build that with the economics, and how do we modify the plants so the people in those areas can thrive and can extend some of their harvests, where the harvests do dip down in the winters, especially here in the Northeast, as there's less light, and things get cold and everything slows down. And I totally agree that the looking at the solution of shipping produce globally from a couple of key places is not the way to use carbon, is not the sustainable access approach. It also makes things fragile if you're depending on one location. If there's a problem in that location, if you not have distributed solutions that people looking at different ways to solve the problem, you're stuck, right? And so, or catastrophe. And so as we're looking at it, how to encourage a distributed model, how to improve the economics, what these folks have to offer in these areas, how to get things that work with the right approaches. And then also looking at finding the places for the seasonality to be a benefit. So some of the things we know is that a lot of the greens we work with, some of the carrots, there's a lot of crops that they benefit from some of that seasonality. So you'll get things that are sweeter as they're slower growing. You have to work within the natural system that you have. And if you try to push coconut trees into one of our high tunnels in upstate New York, so it's a way to modify the environment by just kind of having a thin plastic clear tent over the ground, continuing to farm the earth, but doing it that way. You're not going to get your coconut trees. There's a lot that doesn't translate up. But I think the challenge is looking at the things that do and trying to make the most of them. So there's a lot of points to modify, making sure that all the levers we can pull as we're trying to achieve this, that we're looking for them, that we're looking for the perspectives of where ones we might be blind to are. And one of the key things to that if we have time to get into, is the food culture, because sometimes it means eating something that's different than what you would normally, and finding ways to have bounty throughout the seasons where it's changing what that is, I think is another way to approach it. And you need many voices, many people looking at all the solutions, and everybody exploring everything to do it.
I mean, it seems like all three of you and Michael Mazourek, you mentioned, you spoke a little bit about food culture, but I want to go back to that question for Daniella and Michael Barron, because you both mentioned that you could talk a lot about it, but curious to know what you'd actually say.
Yeah. So I think if high level American food culture is pretty much, one would have access to what they want when they want it. And there have been a lot of loopholes taken to give people that access in supermarkets. And this is also talking from a macro scale. There are obviously cities that are considered food deserts, and people who live in certain places won't have access to these things. So just talking, maybe this is from a sort of privileged point of view, but the places that I've lived, I would be able to go to a supermarket and buy whatever produce I wanted at that time. So this can sort of go one of two ways. Either there will be technologies and innovations that come to sort of meet those expectations while decreasing we keep talking about the carbon footprints of shipping. I think that's spot on. While decreasing that aspect of it, the carbon intensive, not necessarily production, but supply of that product, or there's going to be sort of I don't want to say regression, but sort of retrospective action taken towards increasing the seasonality or like the focus on seasonality in food production in certain areas, like Michael was referring to. I think pragmatically, the former is probably going to be what the driver, just because there will be a lot of thought of how to meet consumer needs. That's just sort of my point of view around it. So I think the food culture of like get what I want when I want it, at least in America, is probably going to remain. So there needs to be a lot of innovation in that space to make it less environmentally taxing. That's American. I could go into it in other countries as well, but I guess from this standpoint, that seems to be the case.
Yeah, I like that perspective a lot. I think, when I think about sort of what's changing in food culture, it's kind of analogous to what's changing in culture, which is we've got a lot of access to kind of a more globalized existence, right? Most people can get, really great corn tortillas in northern New Hampshire. I bought them last night. They're awesome. And there's, avocado. Like we have access to so much stuff. We also have access to the food preferences are expanding as well by virtue of globalization and kind of the curiosity around food from different places or inspired by food from different places. And so as we think about how that sort of sits in balance with, carbon footprint, the future of food, the, upcoming 9-10 billion people on the planet, et cetera, like how do you hold all those things? I keep sort of coming back to this thought that, business is never going to privately put a constraint on what consumer preferences want, right? And so that's where when we think about sort of the role of different stakeholders, the government, et cetera, regulatory bodies, I think there is going to have to be some kind of balance in that, recognizing what businesses exist to do. I think, there are some great examples of that out in the world. There's the Dutch have done it really well recently. They restricted, I think, fast food and sugar in schools, something like that. And their obesity rates went down 12% in the 5 or 6 years since they've implemented it, something like that. I'm getting some of the facts wrong, but it's pretty close to that. Chile has done something as well where they've put, the functional equivalent of the, smoking kills you on cigarettes on junk food. And somewhere around 40% of Chileans say that they make purchase decisions based on that mark on the food, on the packaged goods. So I do think that there's, as consumer preferences change and expand and consumers are, somebody said I'm talking quietly. That never happens.
That's better.
As consumer preferences change and expand, I do see the role of probably other stakeholders and constituencies coming in to ensure that there's some balance there. For better or for worse. Yeah. I'm not pro necessarily, but I've seen it be effective in some cases.
Great. Yeah. Thank you all. Super interesting. Michael, Mazourek, did you have something to add there? I didn't want to cut you off.
I was to say the quick part of the food culture is, I think, just looking where some of the change comes from. And I think one of the things that Michael's what he's doing to distribute the baby leaf lettuce, one of the key drivers behind that is kind of thinking, where did that come from? Well, that was something chef introduced to the U.S. culture from France. So I think looking at increasing as we have this more global culture, looking at where are the people, and for me it's chefs, but where are the key people that are introducing change and bringing solutions from other cultures to our food culture, the things that address food waste that just doesn't happen in many other places, a greater diversity of crops in other places, things that are in the diet. So I think it's one of the big places for change is there's a great potential to change food culture by the people that introduce it, bringing in elements of culture from the rest of the world. I think is key for us.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So in the essence of time, that was a fantastic discussion. Lots of really amazing insights from different perspectives. So thank you all. But we have about 5 minutes left in the panel. And so just as a reminder for those logged in, first of all, apologies for all of our technical issues on this one. We're all here right now, which is amazing. But if you're, too much. Oh, we'll get her back on here for questions. We're doomed. But what I'd love to remind everybody of is the Ask a Question section in the bottom. There's one in there now, so feel free to add some questions here as we finish out. I'll throw one back to the panel and then see if we get any more questions thrown our way. But I'm going to throw you guys just kind of a concluding one, which is, given all these conversations we've had, I think we started to kind of get here, which is, are you more optimistic or pessimistic about the future of food? There's a couple of ways to look at that coin, different sides of it. And there are issues and challenges to tackle, but there's also great work being done, which you're all a part of and have contributed to in various ways. So curious where you sit on that and maybe why.
And I guess if you're pessimistic, what would you need to have happen to be optimistic?
So I think I'm optimistic. There have been a lot of things that I would have changed or done differently in the food system, and there's some things that are ongoing where I would think to take them in a different direction, the opposite direction. But there's an amazing counter to that in just the current connectedness of people, the ability for people to discuss these things, share with each other what we are seeing, what's the change we want to see happen, and many more people are having ways to interact, to join. And so I think I'm optimistic as you're hearing many of these conversations and seeing all the different people that are taking action and joining and starting to employ their solutions. That's the future.
Yeah, I would also say I'm optimistic. The amount of change that I've seen sort of since getting involved in agriculture is so substantial that I can only imagine what it's going to be like 10 years from now. So that's, really very promising. I mean, even at starting at AeroFarms, there's been so many more people in the AgTech space popping up all over the world, whereas, it wasn't as much of a thing previously. So seeing that kind of, not only, those companies happen, but that kind of interest, more investment into the space, and more public profile for agriculture in general. I think as it comes more to the fore, we're going to see a lot more really cool stuff happening. And it's exciting. So that's why I'm optimistic.
Great. And Daniella, we jinxed you, but we tossed a final question to everybody, which is, are you more optimistic or pessimistic about the future of food? And if pessimistic, what would you need to change in order to be optimistic?
The future of food, I'm optimistic on. There are a lot of other futures that I think may be more challenging. But, to the prior point, there's a lot of attention on how to do some of this stuff better, how to innovate, et cetera. I mentioned at the beginning of the call, I've started advising a company called Renewal Mill, which puts a essentially a sort of food dehydrator co-located at the end of a production line. Their first customer is Hodo Soy, and they're upcycling otherwise wasted, food waste that has nutritional content and benefit to it and can be sold to, CPGs, or they can make their own products. Companies like that where there's a solution where everybody wins. There's literally no loser other than maybe the pig farmers who are getting a steal on pig food, which is not irrelevant, but and solving, the food waste, pre-consumer food waste problem in their sliver of the universe. And there are tons and tons of companies that are thinking about that at different points in the in the supply chain, starting at the farm. So I'm really encouraged by what I've been seeing. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, the one question we had logged in there is a question for Daniella that comes from a student here at Tuck, so we can maybe dial that in offline. But unless anybody,
come on by, Charlie.
Yeah.
I can answer the Belcampo question pretty quickly. The challenges of vertical integration. So one is raising 13 species in Northern California, sort of on drought land, is very challenging. There's a reason that the animals tend to be raised in different places in our country and other places, because they have different living conditions. You can think about what it takes to keep chicks warm in the winter, and what that does to the cost of running your farm when you have to heat their their living environment. On the processing side, doing our own processing means we had to build a line with other kind of organic producers to keep that going in a cost-effective way. And then on the demand side, we very much believe in the whole animal and using the whole animal and consuming the whole animal where appropriate. And that decidedly does not align with customer preference on a sort of pound by pound basis. So there's a lot of sort of education of the consumer of what to do with, sort of parts that you're not familiar with, and things like that. So, but Charlie, happy to talk more about that offline.
Great.
And I think there's one final question that just popped up, which is on the food culture, food access front. A lot of the discussion is on a systemic scale. Any suggestions on what is the biggest thing we as individual consumers can do that'll make a difference? Is it buying more local produce? Is it buying more organic produce, eating less protein, grow a veggie patch? Maybe for the interest of time, quick one bullet answer from all of you.
All of the above.
Yeah, learn more about where it comes from and be conscious of the sources and how you're using it.
I was going to say consumer education as well, emphasizing eating less protein, less meat, and emphasizing local produce.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank all three of you so much for being here, and especially Mazourek for spending a lot of time with us today. We appreciate it. And thanks everyone watching for bearing with us. This has been awesome. We're going to close out now, and we'll be back up in about 10 or 15 minutes with the final presentation of the day. So thank you all, and hope you have a good rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.